Is it saying it's recording? I don't see anything telling me it's, there we go. For the sake of recording, I'll say welcome everyone to meeting number 2 of the Hillcrest Sustainability Work Group. We are going to dive into Lead for Communities Platinum certification and the stuff in the LEED scorecard that this group indicated they wanted to spend more time talking about. And I think we're going to start off with our icebreaker, which was also your homework. And over the course of time at the Port Authority, we've developed an approach with our design teams to achieve some of these sustainable design, sustainable development outcomes, which I've talked to these design teams about as bookending. You know, it's pretty easy for a design team, an engineer, an architect, a landscape architect, whatever, to figure out what they have to design and what criteria they have to hit to get a permit and to be able to go build a thing. But not too often are they asked, what's the other bookend? What is the most regenerative, most sustainable, most equitable thing you could design? And it really frees up the minds, in my experience, of designers to think out of the box and to get out of that, I've got to get this permit or I've got to get this thing done, this deliverable for this client, and allows them to be a little creative. So that's the kind of creativity we wanted to try to draw out of all of you folks by asking you to think about what that bookend is. You know, oftentimes those bookends aren't achievable, practical, financeable, etc. But then we take a step or two back until we get to the thing that can actually get done and built. But you don't really know how far you can go until you've pushed as far as you can push, right? So with that said, this is an example, I think either from Becky or Tiffany, of a project in Copenhagen. This is a multi-function project. It is a parking ramp. It is a ski hill in the winter. It's a mountain biking course in the summer. It is a waste to energy plant, which is why there's smoke coming out of that thing. So obviously not all of these most sustainable, coolest, resilient thing we can think of are going to be practical, particularly at Hillcrest. But just to get the juices flowing, we wanted to go there. So some of you sent in homework being examples of things you want, you think are out there. And some of you may not have. So if you haven't, that Chelsea, that is real. Yep. So we'll start off, I guess, by going through the stuff that was sent in, and people could talk a little bit about why they were drawn to that concept. And if you haven't done that yet, spend some time Googling now and paste a link in the chat or an image to help us think about what your coolest, sustainable, resilient thing that you've come across is. So with that said, somebody sent in smart streetlights. Is whoever sent that in on the call?
That was me.
What were you thinking about smart streetlights, Keely?
Yeah, that one came up when I was just researching different sustainability methods, and I liked it because it's not something that I think people think about often. When it comes to pollution, people don't think about light pollution. I definitely don't, living in the city, until I go back home, or until I go back to visit family in rural South Dakota, and I realize how much of the night sky that we're missing. And so, yeah, it's definitely something that I think isn't on the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and something I'd like to see targeted in the future. I think the solutions to it are like really easy and easily practiced, I guess. Things like smart sensor street lights that only turn on like when cars or people are walking or something like that. Also switching to more efficient bulbs with like targeted light was a big one that came up in my reading. So yeah, these are all practical things that help both humans and our like animal communities. I know light pollution affects everything from aquatic animals to birds and insects. So yeah.
I've got a funny slash cool story for you and a lead credit for you. Neil deGrasse Tyson was a keynote speaker at the U.S. Green Building Conference, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. And he wrapped up his speech. He got done. People were freaking out. He did a great job, but then he started freestyling. He's like, let me throw up these other slides. I've never done these before. And he had taken photos out of an airplane flying at night into New York City, Boston, and Chicago. And he actually, maybe it was just Boston and Chicago. And he said, look at this. And the downtowns were completely dark. And the only thing you could see for lights was these fingers of residential and thoroughfare roads with the streetlights everywhere. I mean, just like this sprawling spider web. But it was really interesting that for a guy who thinks about astronomy and the stars and how easy it is to see the stars via light pollution, he was really focused on these streetlights and the fact that they were really messing up his world. The lead credit is there is a lead credit that we have to work with the city on to figure out to get the right kind of streetlights, because there is a standard for glow. What is it called? I'm going to space it here.
There's low glare and I think sky glow.
Night sky. You got to meet the night sky standard, which is a light pollution standard. Yeah. Yes, there you go. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Who put up a sensible mix of technologies? Thank you, Keely. Did somebody send in homework about a sensible mix of technologies?
Yeah, I want to say that we're looking at John for that one. It's the timber.
I was going to say you're muted, John. I was going to say that's got to be John.
Yes, I see. The number one thing I see in this building, other than the beauty of wood, it is an amazing material. It is the ultimate carbon sink. There was, I don't know if you guys saw, there was recently a study released about all of the carbon capture. There's a plethora of ideas that have been out there and people working on it, and hundreds of them, and only a couple of them are net energy positive. And it seems like kind of crazy to have to try to, with machines, capture carbon, when we have these wonderful biological machines which do it very quickly. And when they're done capturing it, it's not just something stored in limestone, 1,000 feet underground. It's these materials which we can make into almost anything. So it's back to the future. And it's, I don't know, I think it's going to be really big again, because we kind of with concrete and steel, and the new factory that I'm planning, I'm even looking at wood floors, fully capable of handling forklifts. And there's a couple species of wood that can handle it just fine. The weight of a forklift, twisting and turning and all that kind of stuff. And there's companies that make these floors, and there's really no reason not to do it. And when your building is lighter, it sinks slower. Your foundations can be less of a foundation underneath, less site preparation, all kinds of things. It's a win-win.
Less concrete?
Less concrete. A lot less concrete.
Less embodied carbon. It's a lot of embodied carbon.
Yeah, and look at what was done with wood. If you've ever been out west and seen some of the railroad bridges that span canyons that were built in the late 1800s and into the 20th century, completely out of wood, supporting trains which weigh hundreds and hundreds of tons, moving at on a curve. I mean, it's insane when you do the math at how much forces. And so a measly 10,000 pound forklift driving around, no big deal. So we're in a renaissance again.
Another renaissance. I love it. Let's move on. Somebody sent in a comment about wind and solar power.
Oh, sorry. I think that's me. Rebecca.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi there. I just as alternatives to or to other fuel sources, I a friend of mine is really, obviously has his own company, but has really encouraged or taught me a lot about wind power and solar power especially, and he just gets so excited about it in talking, and so in turn that's kind of what I'm into also. So pretty much all I have to say about it.
We're super jazzed about solar, and I think you've heard us say we think we need to deploy about 12 to 14 megawatts of rooftop and ground mounted solar out here. So I anticipate there being solar panels everywhere. I anticipate it being a requirement of all buyers. And if you see, I think Vomella now over on Arcade and Phelan, 1.3 megawatts. That's got to be the largest rooftop in the state, Russ. Certainly in the metro. And that was a business owner making a business decision to do the right thing for the climate and his brand, but also to offset the production costs of the equipment they use. So it's kind of a no-brainer. So definitely solar, wind, obviously large-scale wind turbines can be a little difficult in the urban areas, but there are more compact vertical turbines, and people are thinking up new ways to utilize wind energy in the urban areas all the time. Seen some pretty cool prototypes that maybe we'll get around to looking at here. Somebody sent in the comment, my bike plus my neighbors plus public transit equals car free. Chelsea, I think you might be muted.
Actually,
you're not say you're muted.
Your sound settings might be adjusted for a different video format. If you've been switching between Teams and Zoom anytime recently, it might do that to your computer.
Still not working. Maybe while Chelsea's trying to fix the technology, we also had a couple of other folks who mentioned bikes. So is this Matt? And then it looks like Russ also had an image of some bikes in the chat. Do either of you want to chime in?
I can jump in. That's a picture also from Copenhagen, and I had a chance to be there a few years ago, and that image is not of an event. That's just a daily commute.
Just a day. Monday.
Just a day, just Monday, right? Exactly. And Copenhagen is certainly not a cold climate city in the same way that we are, but they're not a warm climate city either. And people figure out how to move around on bikes. I mean, certainly not everyone, but it's like 60% commute share there. And of course, a much denser place than we are. But rather than thinking of it as, oh, they're just old Europe and dense and that makes it easy, it actually has been a 45-year project to make this possible there and done incrementally over time. And so I just think about that story, which is that it takes time to sort of rethink and reimagine the way that our built infrastructure works for us. But every piece that we build or rebuild, like we're doing at Hillcrest, is an important component of making futures like this possible. So that's my 2 cents.
Good point, Russ. And I know the city's bike plan and the investments that the city's been making in bike accessibility is pretty important and has been going strong for a few years here now, and only got a few more decades to go to make it, right?
That's right.
This photo is reminding me of a study abroad I did in Holland when I almost smashed into an entire family on one bike. It was a dad and 3 daughters of various sizes, and he definitely knew I was American because he calmly said in English, "You have to stay to the right." And wherever he was going, he had the whole posse with him, and everybody seemed warm and happy.
Matt, did you want to chime in too?
Sure, yeah. I guess just what really struck me about the article is not just the great sustainability impacts from this, but just how, I guess, just the safety impacts that they talk about, just how easy it is to get around without having to worry about either slipping off the road or being hit by a car. I try to bike to work whenever I can, even in cold weather like we're having, but the way my neighborhood is situated, there's not really a good way to get anywhere to the west, because Maryland and White Bear are both extremely dangerous to bike on, and they're the only streets that are really plowed. So if you can get to a trail, then you're fine, but we really don't have some of those connections. There's something really good to keep in mind. I've been hit by a car before trying to get to a trail, so it's really, I think it's just really good to keep in mind that, as Russ said, it takes a long time to build this stuff up, but the sooner we can kind of get into that paradigm of putting that safety as a priority, the better off people will be as we continue to improve it.
Yeah, and I'm sad that it looks like Chelsea had to drop off. Hopefully she'll be able to reconnect, because this is, I think, a picture of her bike in the winter here, and how important the trail connections are, plus having the network of people who can support you if you do need a car for a longer journey, and then public transit for other local trips.
Geothermal snowmelt system.
Yeah. So I know, Yanni, a lot of places other than here will utilize your geothermal system before or spur of the well, for the property itself to span the sidewalk and parking lot areas. So that way we're not using salt, we're not using any kind of anything petro to move the snow, and it's an automatic snow deterrent. And then we're also, of course, getting our building heated at the 48, 52 degrees. And the ROI on this type of system is tends to be a little sooner than even solar or wind, unless you're doing a large wind project. But just to step back to the bike thing, it wouldn't be bad to possibly, if there's any kind of rapid bus system, to either butt into the Gold Line once that's in, or to a direct connect to downtown train system. But that's an MTC thing. And then also on the bike situation, are we going to do are we going to request a SWAT or do a SWAT of, say, like Larpenteur, Maryland, White Bear, McKnight with the added traffic?
Is that a traffic engineering question?
Yes.
There have been a bunch of city and county traffic engineers for a couple of years looking at this now on what's called the Technical Advisory Committee that went into the master plan. And so I'm not sure how far out their analysis has gone, but I'm sure I could find that stuff and point you in the right direction to see if it is what you were looking for, or if it's sufficient in your mind or not sufficient in your mind.
No, I would appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. So back to the geothermal, and I don't know if it would be feasible to ask for every building to have this done, but at least the mixed use and the apartment complexes with office space, however that design ends up being, and because it's going to reduce traffic and as far as needing to clean the space and having to move cars to get them get the space cleaned. And then where the town square is, I don't know if underground parking has been discussed for out of the community traffic to park instead of allocating tarmac. But so that's all I have on the geothermal.
In that node, the neighborhood node, there is intended to be some sort of public amenity gathering plaza type space. And that would be a great opportunity to do something like this and make it that much more usable year round and easier to maintain. Free thermal energy makes these things make a lot more sense than having to burn coal or burn oil and gas to do it.
Right.
Well, thank you for that, Yanni. Varied electrical service.
I think that the last two are some other suggestions that have been by folks who have already had a chance to chime in, but wanted to make sure we could hear from Mike as well. Put a couple of links in the chat.
Sure. So the first link I put up was for Cooperative Energy Futures. What I really love about them is that they're a cooperative group with a bunch of different investors who have a system of essentially providing the upfront costs of getting solar panels put up on buildings that are large enough to host the solar gardens. And they prioritize, in people who are get into the subscription of getting access to the energy, they prioritize lower income families and residents, people who oftentimes get overlooked by solar garden initiatives and stuff. I wasn't quite sure what the financing was, or what the scope for the solar gardens or the solar panels for the buildings on here was. But if financing is an issue at all, I think Cooperative Energy Futures is a fantastic way to get solar panels on, with mitigating the costs. They do have a thing where they have contracts. I think it's on a 20 years at a time. So some buildings that they try to get solar panels on resist having a building exist for 20 years. They're like, well, maybe we'll bulldoze this building in a couple of years or something like that. But I would hope that the buildings being set up on the Hillcrest site would not be bulldozed in a few years. So, and the other one is, and based on the homework assignment, I wasn't quite sure if that counted as an initiative or not. But the other one is an initiative that I'm trying to get going for a while, to get solar panels put up on the St. Paul Public Schools. Both for there are a number of different rooftops on the St. Paul Public Schools that are large enough to host solar gardens. And with options that can provide the upfront costs, it's been a bit bewildering. Some of the resistance to actually get work done on this and get it going. Oftentimes the excuse is, well, we'd love to get this done, but we want to own the panels. And that's great if they do it, but it's usually ends up being just an excuse to not do anything, given that they'd only ever do it once St. Paul Public Schools have this big glut of money, which they're never going to have. But given that there are both grants out there for people to get solar panels done recent times, and that the fact there are options like Cooperative Energy Futures, it's a lot more. It's kind of more doable and much more long-term profitable than it's ever been. So it's these are initiatives that I'm keen on.
Becky, can you click back on that Cooperative Energy Futures slide?
Sure.
Or tab. So I do know Cooperative Energy Futures and have known of them and their model for a number of years. I've met with Tim from CEP over the years. And I think it's really interesting and very accurate, where it says at the bottom, Cooperative Energy Futures does things differently, because they really do have this social justice approach to solar and renewable energy deployment. It's important to note that not all community solar gardens are equal, right? Actually,
Yep.
Most of them, Cooperative Energy Futures is in fact one of the few where a community solar garden is actually owned by the members of the community. Most of them, in fact, wind up being sold and resold into some equity firm, and the community can subscribe to them, but that is different than ownership. And CEP has figured this out over the years. I was talking to Tim years ago when they hadn't been able to do one yet, and now he's got several of them completed. So great idea, and something we're thinking about, but we're also trying to make sure that to educate people along the way, that just because it's called a community solar garden doesn't necessarily imply all of the great benefits that folks like that these guys have figured out their model.
That's right. Yep.
I see
All
that
right,
Chelsea's back. Do you want to try chiming in again? And then Chelsea, we did talk through a couple people had bike related ideas. I didn't know if maybe you wanted to touch on some of the more high level concepts that are shown on this slide, or bikes, whichever you'd like. Oh, still can't hear you.
Oh, bummer. Now your video's frozen here as well, Chelsea. Well, let's keep moving. And she might hop out and hop back in or reboot or something. Did we get through the list on the other slide there, Becky?
Yep, I think that was everybody. So I think there were a couple of these. Those were a little bit more focused on specific technologies or strategies, and some of the concepts on this page, bioregionalism, energy democracy, and multifunctionality, are a little bit more big picture concepts that'll be helpful to keep in mind as we talk through specific strategies, and just the overall approach. So thanks to everybody who submitted those ideas as well. Monty, I wonder if you wanted to, we had wanted to spend a couple of minutes up front on something else that the port wanted to bring up.
The announcement, yes. You guys may know, you may have been noticed or not, but next Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 11 a.m., sometime in that window, is a Planning Commission public hearing on the master plan, which is a great time to provide your input. Many in this group and around the community have said, how do we help? How do we help make all this good stuff happen and help make this a carbon-free community? Supporting the master plan and moving the project forward, that would be a great way to support it. We do know, for 18 months or so, there have been some other ideas out there from a group or groups of other folks, and just know we're well aware of them. You may have been contacted by other groups about other plans or alternate ideas. And just so you know, we're happy to answer any questions you may have. At times we found some of the information out there on these alternate plans to be either not accurate or really not feasible for a variety of engineering, design, and feasibility reasons. So just want to let everyone know there is a public hearing next Friday at 8:30 in the morning. And we'd be happy to have any or all of you there voicing your support for moving Hillcrest forward such that we can start to build this carbon-free community. And if you have any questions about anything else you're hearing out there, feel free to reach out. I'll give you my cell number. And actually, if you have questions, you could reach out to me directly. If you shoot me a text first, I might not recognize your number, so shoot me a text first, and then I'll know who it is and pick up the phone. 651-338-1039, 651-338-1039. Thank you. That's the first. There will be a second city council public hearing in like April-ish before the city council considers it in May. But that's the next sort of step forward. If that doesn't keep moving, if the master plan doesn't keep moving, much of the momentum and the initiatives and the financing that is starting to come together really start. We gotta build the snowball and keep it rolling here, guys. All right, moving on. Okay, the meat of today, and we're down to under an hour, so I'm going to be quick in my little part here. This is an image of the Starmocracy. That's a new one. I think I just coined that. The Starmocracy we tried last time. And those stars, of course, were the credits that you folks were particularly interested in. Just a reminder that Lead for Communities is this framework, so we all have the same language and the same metrics, or some language, same language and metrics. We've prioritized what we're going to talk about today based on your feedback. Some of these are very clear cut and have a very clear path forward. Some of them have much more room for development and input and co-creation, like, for example, resilience planning for the site, which there wasn't a lot of stars or even any stars by resilience planning. So there's a slide about resilience planning later. and just be engaged. Raise your hand, type stuff in the chat, shout out if you hear something you like or want to dive into, or you think is ridiculous along the way. Becky? So these next like 8 slides or something, these are the categories that folks didn't really star, you weren't really interested in. I'm going to blow through them about a minute each, and then we're going to get to the ones just so everyone knows what they are, what's in these categories, and then we'll get to the ones that you guys had starred. So one of the prerequisites in Lead for Communities is an integrated process, meaning that you have to have an integrated design team, you have to have multidisciplines, you have to have regulators and different scientists and engineers and designers all working together to create the plan. And that we certainly have done in conjunction with the city for the last 2 years. There's a credit in there about green building policies and incentives. And one of the ways we're trying to get that point is by requiring all buildings to be LEED or Green Community certified. Next slide, Becky. I can't remember if this group has seen this or not. These are just coming hot off the press and will be going out via some press stuff over the next couple of weeks here. And this is a rendering of what the wetland could look like. This is Hillcrest. This is a rendering that Tiffany and the team at LHB put together. And this is one way the boardwalk treatment could be added to the restored wetlands. And you see the industrial buildings in the back with the Arts and Employment District concept being these big murals on them. You see some ground-mounted solar off to the left there. There's about 6 of these showing different parts of the site that are, like I said, just hot off the press, and we'll be delivering them publicly over the next couple of weeks here. But you guys are getting a sneak preview. Pretty cool amenity. So the natural systems and ecology category includes a credit for ecosystem assessment, which is complete, a construction activity pollution prevention plan, which is underway. There's a green space requirement. To get this particular point in Lead for Communities, you would have to have 8 acres of green space. We're doing 20 acres of green space. This is the light pollution reduction credit, street light glare, sky glow minimization. There's a separate credit that talks about the energy efficiency of the lights. And that's the one we're working with the city and Excel Energy on. Natural resources conservation and restoration. It's interesting to note that, the ecosystem services at this site, being the wetlands, the soil, the trees, have really all been degraded by the contamination, and the wetlands to some degree by their lack of maintenance or care over the years. So even more so than a conservation project, this project really entails the remediation and the restoration of those ecosystem services. There's only one of 11 wetlands out here that's high quality. The rest of them are like managed Class C. So they're pretty degraded. And they also do have this mercury in their sediment in the wetlands. So we do need to remediate and restore the ecosystem services rather than just conserving a natural resource. We got to fix it first. And a resilience plan, that is also in this category. And that is something we would love to have folks weigh in on. To get that point, we've said we will do a resilience plan. The city has their climate action and resilience plan. There's a county document. I think those are referenced here below. There's a couple of rating systems that we pulled some ideas out of. So a resilience plan could include a vulnerability and capacity assessment, looking at what are the top hazards and how do we mitigate them. A resilience plan itself could include things like a resilience hub, emergency shelter, kitchen space, community tool share. I think of this one as what happens when things go to hell in a handbasket. How do you get the felled oak out of your driveway after a tornado if you don't own a chainsaw? What do you do in the case of extreme drought, extreme storms, etc.? The resilience plan could talk about things like hardening roof systems, green infrastructure, and there's a multitude of resources here. There is a rating system kind of like LEED called RELI, R-E-L-I, which is a internationally based set of ideas, a framework about what are some smart resilience things to do. Let's go. I see 2 hands up. Keely, what?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions about the previous slide. first was just for the lead credit. You said you needed at least 8 acres, but is that like per 50 acres, or how does that work?
It is a calculation, and when you do that calculation for this site, the number is 8 acres, and we have committed on the front end when we acquired the site to produce 20.
Gotcha. And then the second question was just related to like the wetlands and conserving old growth trees specifically. I haven't actually like walked the site or anything. I've just driven by, but I've heard that a lot of the old growth trees are by the wetlands. So are those able to be preserved, or is it hard to like do some of the cleanup with those trees?
It is. There has been a tree inventory. The city's consultant and our consultant both did tree inventories. We've identified the high value trees, like the ones you're talking about, and we are committed to doing our best to preserving them. Tiffany's speaking with a company right now that's looking at our ability to pick up some of the more valuable ones and either relocate them on site or move them off site. It's going to be a little tricky because the root balls themselves will be filled with soil that has mercury in it. So there's an environmental liability associated with then moving them off site or even relocating them on site. So it is going to be tricky, but we have heard a lot about preserving trees. We will do our best. And at the end of the day, the Pollution Control Agency tells us when we can stop digging, when we can stop cleaning. We have to sample all the soil while we're digging. And once it's clean, we can stop. So there will be quite a few trees that are lost, but we are committed to doing the best we can with the conditions out there.
Great, thanks for answering. Yeah, I think just from like a climate standpoint too, as many old growth trees that we can preserve makes a difference.
Trees are amazing, amazing inventions. That is for sure. Yanni.
Yes. So on the wetlands, it's my understanding that there's only one that we can actually keep as is, and the rest need to be restored. And then how many? What's the plan on how many we're restoring to? It's not the same. It's not the same number as what we have currently, correct?
Tiffany, I think, is our resident expert, and I think the answer is 1-to-1. Yes. So we have to mitigate and on site at a 1-to-1 ratio, or the watershed will not give us a permit.
Yes.
Okay.
And
right.
Actually, there's an additional requirement to do a 2-to-1 mitigation or credit purchase for the WACA compliance. So for every acre of wetland that needs to be cleaned up and moved elsewhere, we have to count that one on site and then buy credits for a second acre off site to complete our WACA compliance. So there's 5.6 acres of wetland on the site, and when it's all said and done, there will be 5.6 acres of wetland on the site, and they will be free of mercury.
Oh, outstanding. Okay, because I had heard different, and thank you. So okay.
They will be free of mercury, and they will be functioning ecologically as God intended.
No, just that we were doing 1-to-1. It sounded like that we were going to lose some in one of the plans. Something I read, and it's not.
There were other iterations, but the final master plan includes enough space for 1-to-1.
Sure, good. All right, thank you.
Let's go Chelsea and then Russ. Oh, nothing.
Maybe in the chat, Chelsea.
Do you want to type your comment, Chelsea?
Don't have access to the chat.
You can also feel free to email Tiffany, especially would probably be a good person, and me and Monty, and we can communicate. Yeah.
Why don't you
Sorry, it's not working for you.
Why don't you send an email while Russ comments here?
Sure, thanks. As much as this project overall can be restorative in some ways, in other ways it has the potential to increase urban heat island relative to the current condition. And so I think that's just an important concept in thinking about this area of resilience, and the things that we should be thinking about mitigating for as hotter summers are gonna be probably at the top of that list, if not close to it. And so just thinking about the site itself and its contribution overall to the urban heat island.
Gotcha. Tell us when you get an email, Tiffany, but otherwise let's keep moving here. We've got a bunch more to get through. Water efficiency. So integrated water management, there's a credit for that. The city has done a water availability assessment. Some of these are kind of a low bar because this same system applies in sub-Saharan Africa and China as it would here. Water access and quality, everyone's got to have clean water. And then we have a system in place in our state to do that. Stormwater management is an interesting one here because we know there has been flooding issues in the past, I believe south of the site. And we heard a lot about concerns about the project contributing more to more flooding. And it's interesting to think about the fact that right now on the site, there really isn't much of any modern stormwater management tools. We literally just had to unplug a pipe that's probably been plugged for 5 or 10 years and has been overflowing the sidewalk and causing a bunch of problems. So, this site will have to be permitted. The port has practiced what we call next generation stormwater management for almost 15 years now. And so we will bring best management practices, and all these hard surfaces, all these sites will have to deal with their own stormwater, their own rainwater that falls on them appropriately. So net, building this site out should actually reduce the flood risk to nearby neighbors than what it is today. Because once those soils get saturated, everything just sheet flows off and it's going somewhere, and hopefully not in your basement. Smart water systems. The city does use smart water systems. Next one.
Let's revisit Chelsea's question. Tiffany added it to the chat. What is the timeline for mercury mitigation, and how would this mitigation relate to grading for the site? Is this a separate or later process?
It is done in one exercise we call mass grading, and we anticipate mass grading starting, assuming we can secure all the funding, we anticipate mass grading starting in August of this year, and it will take an entire year. We've got to move about 500,000 yards of dirt, and that is for grading, for roads, for development, and for remediation and geotechnical, all at once in one big swoop. There is a materials and resources credit. There's a diversion required for the construction and demolition waste from infrastructure. The building developers will also, being that they're being required to be LEED certified, they'll have a diversion requirement. There's a solid waste management credit that the city and county programs hit. Russ, I wasn't sure if I had this one right. Organic waste treatment. Is there a citywide organics collection program starting this year or maybe next year? Or did I dream that?
Pilots this year, probably full implementation next year, and it's Ramsey and Washington counties jointly offering that with upgrades happening out at Newport.
Awesome. Is swim club still a thing, or did they just ban swim club, Russ?
That's technically still a thing. Yeah.
I started my career at the state working with something called the Solid Waste Management Coordinating Board, the swim club, group of metro entities that deal with solid waste in the cities here. Recycling infrastructure, also we qualify for this credit given what we do in St. Paul, and responsible sourcing for infrastructure. We right now are pouring through the 5 most expensive infrastructure materials, like concrete, like dirt, like pavement, and we have to require, I think it's something like 50% recycled content in those 5 most expensive materials. Does that sound right, Tiff? Something like that. 40%. Okay. Let's keep rolling here. There's a quality of life category, which requires a demographic assessment, requires you're looking at and identifying social infrastructure, schools, hospitals, parks, etc. There's an economic growth credit, which in this case we reach by bringing jobs to the site, attainable jobs with low barriers to entry, near affordable housing, and the required job density we require on these sites. Affordable housing will be dealt with. The master plan talks broadly about the city goals, working with the city, the county, other partners as people compete for low-income housing tax credit and financing. There will be affordable housing on site. We don't know how much or at what levels of affordability, but we certainly have heard the need for deeply and permanently affordable housing. And those are the kinds of strategies that would get us credits in this category, points in this credit. Public health, we have committed to doing outdoor air quality monitoring and displaying outdoor air quality monitoring. And the emergency management credit here really is about response time for emergency services, which we qualify for here in St. Paul. And this one, I'm just going to give a little overview of on this slide, and then Becky's going to talk, because this is now the credits you guys really wanted to talk about. This is the ones with all the stars. So energy and greenhouse gas emissions, that's the category. There's a credit for power access, reliability, and resiliency. There's a credit for energy and greenhouse gas emissions, where we've all spent a bunch of our time for the last 2 years. There's an energy efficiency credit. And this in particular here, it's talking about the energy efficiency of wastewater plants, pumps, street lighting, the district energy system, the infrastructure energy efficiency. LEED for buildings that will be required, that's talking about building energy efficiency. This credit's really about the energy efficiency of the infrastructure. Renewable energy, this credit asks you to maximize on-site solar, which we believe we are doing. And grid harmonization is sort of that next step of improving our energy grid, and there's a point or points for that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Becky. So we got through all the ones that you guys weren't interested in. Now let's talk about the stuff you wanted to talk about. Sorry about that.
And I think that it's fine if we want to really dig in more detail here and save the transportation and land use, which is the other category that there was a lot of interest in. We can always save that for next time. So don't feel like you need to hold back on asking questions or comments because you're worried about time for this.
Cool. That's a great reminder, Becky. Thank you.
So we introduced the last time the goal of being a carbon-free community here, and so just wanted to have a little reminder of what the definition of that is for this community, which would be that each year after the community is fully developed, it offsets as much greenhouse gas as is emitted due to the activities taking place within its geographic boundaries. And that's a pretty important distinction, especially because there are different ways of looking at what those activities are. So LEED for Communities is only concerned with scopes 1 and 2, meaning it's looking at the natural gas use, the electricity use, the travel that's happening within those 112 acres. And then if there were any waste or wastewater treatment happening within those 112 acres, which is not really being proposed at this time. So that's for the LEED for Communities calculation. We know, especially on that transportation side, that there's going to be a lot of transportation that this project can have some impact on, where this site is just the origin or the destination of trips. So our analysis also takes a look at that out of boundary transportation that'd be considered in scope 3, as well as the waste and wastewater treatment that's happening outside of the community's boundaries. So with that in mind, you saw one version of this graph at the first meeting, but this is showing the scopes 1 and 2, what LEED cares about in this kind of saturated colors, and then the scopes 3 in the lighter colors here. So you can see there's a pretty big difference, especially on the transportation side, which is this green. This graph is showing a baseline, which is 2018 St. Paul information in tons, short tons in this case, of carbon dioxide equivalents per capita, which includes both residents and the working population. So that baseline is 8.8 if we're just looking at those scopes 1 and 2, up to 9.0 if we account for solid waste management that's happening outside of the city's boundaries. When we get to business as usual, this is looking at what we would expect based on improved energy efficiency in buildings due to building energy codes having been updated since all of the buildings in St. Paul were built, included in that baseline. In addition to changes in Xcel Energy's grid mix. So here we're looking at the year 2030 as a year that this community would be fully built out. So we include Excel's anticipated 2030 electric grid mix. So you can see this portion that's electricity has decreased dramatically, both from efficiency and from cleaner energy, whereas the natural gas portion has reduced by not quite as much due just to efficiency. And then on the transportation side, you can see there's just, you probably can't see, there's just a tiny little sliver that we've calculated as travel happening on the like mile or two of road that's actually within the 112 acres. Most of the travel is obviously happening outside of the community's boundaries. And so for the business as usual, we've modeled moderate EV, electric vehicle adoption, based on some projections of where the market is expected to be going without, you know, additional support or EV charging infrastructure kind of beyond what would be happening anyway. So when we get to the design, we're looking at completely eliminating emissions from building energy use, and doing that through switching to all electric, so eliminating those fossil fuels from natural gas or for heating, through a district energy system, and then meeting the electricity needs through on-site solar to the extent that we can. So that's why the orange is disappearing. That is all, of course, predicated on these buildings being very energy efficient so that we can meet those loads with renewables on site. For the transportation, there's still just a tiny bar in the scope 1 area of transportation happening on site, but we're proposing an increase in electric vehicle adoption and an additional reduction in vehicle miles traveled kind of per person or per job or per household due to other strategies like supporting car sharing or supporting live work proximity. And we'll talk about those low carbon transportation strategies when we dig into the transportation and land use credits, because it can get a little bit more specific there. And then some additional modest reduction, solid waste reduction and diversion from landfills incineration. Are there any questions about the numbers before we dig further into these design strategies? Okay. Then let's get into it. So there's a lot of interest in district energy and geothermal. So we wanted to share that the site is pursuing district heating and cooling, and aquifer thermal energy storage, or ATIS, is one of a couple of different geothermal exchange technologies that are currently being evaluated for the site. These systems work. It's basically using the aquifers deep underground as a thermal battery. So it stores heat in the summer to be used in the winter and vice versa. Buildings would connect to a low temperature water loop and use electric heat pumps for heating and cooling. So that's allowing any connected building to be fully electric, which is difficult to achieve otherwise in a cold climate like Minnesota. So ATIS systems are being used extensively in Europe, and the first system in Minnesota is being pursued at the Towerside Innovation District in Minneapolis. Any questions about that? Or Monty, did you want to jump in with any additional details?
No, I think you did a great job.
I guess I have just a brief question. You said you were looking into it. How far into it, looking into it, and or like, what is your assessment so far about viability here?
We've had Evergreen Energy under contract for probably about a year now. They've done an initial feasibility assessment and then a follow-up, and have come back with, and they looked at a number of different technologies and strategies, building by building geothermal versus district, versus a district system powered by a central plant versus ATIS. And ATIS came back on top for a couple of reasons. One being we can modularize it and we can put in these wells, a half dozen of these wells throughout the site while the site is built out. Makes it a lot more cost efficient if you're not having to install all the infrastructure for every building on day one and then wait 5 to 10 years for all the buildings to show up and for people to start paying for it. And it's also that small footprint of being able to have these wells around the site, and there's only a handful of them, versus literally hundreds, if not thousands, of wells that would be littered all over the site if we took a more conventional approach. We just don't have, there's too much programming need, too much land use need, and not enough space to have a 5 or 10 acre well field, for example, to power this thing. So the next step we have not pulled the trigger on. There's an aquifer test that you need to do. It's about $100,000 to drill this hole in the ground. They did it over at Towerside, and Ken Smith from Evergreen tells me he anticipates the results will be similarly positive because it's the same aquifer. But there's some thermal dynamics, fluid dynamics they have to test to make sure that they can use the aquifer and basically keep the warm water in one part of it and keep the cooler water in the other part of it and access them when they need to. So we right now are really trying to figure out how to finance it. And that's part of an ongoing discussion with the city, the Port Authority, District Energy/Evergreen, Excel. So we're trying to figure it out, and running pretty hard at a couple of different options. Some of that will be probably coming to light as we move forward post master plan. We kind of got to get over that hurdle, and then we can really start sinking our teeth and getting people focused on these technologies. Right now, we're starting to design right-of-ways, like road sections, and we're making sure we're reserving enough room in the roadways that we could put these pipes in. Regardless of technology, we just got to make sure we've got a clear corridor that's the right depth and the right width, et cetera. So we've instructed our engineering team to keep designing as if this thing's going in, and it's on myself and others and Russ. I'm pointing at you. I'm looking at you, Russ, to figure out how to finance it. Frankly, it shouldn't be that difficult. The Port Authority has issued revenue bonds since the 1980s to finance and operate Energy Park Utility Company. So we already do this on a pretty regular basis. It's just that timing of when do you have to have the capital to build it, and when do the buildings show up to pay for it, and how risky is it, and how do you mitigate that risk? And that's a question that the city and the Port Authority have to answer yet.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Have you looked at actually electric, or has it been discussed electric production via this district energy or geothermal? Like an actual small on-site power plant.
Like with it, using this thermal energy to like turn a turbine or something? Is that
exactly? Yeah.
I'm not the right guy to ask. My sense is that this low temperature energy doesn't generate enough oomph to turn a turbine, but I would not be the right guy to make that statement.
Okay, so that was my other question. Is yeah, how deep is the field? I mean, that would answer it, right?
Oh, these are like 500-foot deep wells.
Okay, all right, that answers it. Yep.
And Tiffany is also our residential geologist. So in case you have other geology questions, I will shut up.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay, well, I have a quick question. Is this energy system something that the surrounding neighborhoods might be able to tap into? I'm sure not right away, but down the line.
Interestingly enough, Maplewood's comp plan has rezoned the northeast quadrant, the intersection of Larpenteur and McKnight. So Kitty Corner from Hillcrest is in Maplewood, and they view that being built out as a mixed-use development. And having worked on the district energy system over Energy Park Utility Company over the years, I can tell you these district energy systems want more load. It gets more cost effective the more things are hooked up to it. So I think once we get this thing in, as development and redevelopment occurs around this area, people would certainly look at opportunities to expand it. Kind of hard to say until some of that stuff happens, but I think people would look at it as an opportunity, sure.
And can you say something? Oh, sorry. Just really quick about the risk, if any, to the aquifer itself in terms of changing the temperature or some sort of rupture or using the water. how is the aquifer used?
So again, not my exact area of expertise, but the Department of Health has to license this. And being it is the first deployment over at Towerside, my understanding is they have gotten comfortable with it, and they either have or they've sent a letter indicating they are willing and able to permit this system over at Towerside. My understanding is you're extracting the water in a closed loop system and returning it at a fairly similar temperature. And so I don't believe there's a huge that frankly, that was kind of one of my first questions, Chelsea, was like, well, geez, that's got to do something weird to the bugs that live 500 feet below ground. And don't the bugs that live 200 feet below ground eat those bugs? And don't the salamander, I was going where you were going. So we certainly, as we get into the feasibility of the system, will have to answer all kinds of more questions like that better than I am doing right now. But I do know it has been reviewed by the state and looks like they're going to be able to get it permitted over at Towerside. Russ, do you know anything different or otherwise?
Well, your team may have more expertise than I, but I will share what I know. One, we looked at this pretty deeply at the Highland Bridge site, at the Ford site, before not being able to move forward. And my understanding was that an ADAS system like this can meet about 40% of the thermal energy load typically for what's needed in terms of the buildings. And to your earlier question, Chelsea, about others being able to tie into it, it's not super cost effective for like a single family home, because you'd have to install a bunch of piping for a relatively small amount of energy need. So the more dense and bigger energy need, the more it makes sense to extend piping to something that's nearby, is sort of the easiest way to think about that, right? And I don't believe there's any water actually being extracted at all from the aquifer. You said extraction. It's literally just a closed loop system using the temperature of the aquifer to either heat water or cool water as it passes through.
Yes.
And so there's no actual interaction between what's in the pipes and the aquifer itself.
No, it might make everybody feel better to know that there are no critters 500 feet below the surface or 200 feet below the surface. And there's no like material that's going to be injected into the aquifer. It's not like a fracking process where you're trying to fill it like a jelly donut. It is approximately 51 degrees Fahrenheit, a couple hundred feet below the surface consistently all the time, which is why it's always chilly in a cave, but not freezing cold in a cave. It has a really nice, consistent thermal profile. So it's really trying to suck or use that 51 degree pool of water to heat something up to 51 degrees, use a thermal exchanger to pump more than 51 degrees into a building, and then send it back down at approximately the same temperature. So you're cooling water off in the summer and heating it up in the winter.
Not an injection well and not an extraction well. And I think that's what the state had to figure out was, well, what is it then?
Yep. There would be no goo going anywhere.
Let's keep rolling here unless there are more questions. Oh, you've got to do the all electric bullet yet, I think.
John, did you have a question on that?
Yes. Well, a comment. I'm wondering why the Port Authority feels the need to do this part of it. When I looked at the economics of putting in a well for a heat pump on my existing building here, it's really not that expensive. Even to drill a deeper one, if you think a little bit long term. The problem is everybody thinks so short term on everything. I think it's great that you're doing this, but I'm just saying if it didn't happen or something, I just put in my own, and if you do the numbers, it works out really good, especially if you've got solar on your roof, And the greenhouses, they're the most advanced greenhouses now are pumping thermal energy into the ground all summer long, and depending on the depth you put it at, you can get that energy to come up through your soil at about the same offset as summer is to winter and vice versa. so that the heat energy comes back out when you need it without any heat pump. And there's a lot of people growing fruit and many other things at this latitude with those type of systems. So this is an amazing system. I love it. But I guess the Port Authority, and you can answer this, is just trying to lead the way on this and make it easier for businesses to adopt this. Is that it? Yeah.
That is part of it. There are some economies of scale, I think, when Evergreen did the math of doing it with one centralized system being operated versus multiples, as you can imagine, multiple heat pumps, multiple heat exchangers in every one of these buildings. And there are also some financing benefits to it being a publicly owned utility. State bonding, for example, tax exempt bonds, tax exempt revenue bonds. So there are some financing tricks that lead it to make sense for it to be a Port Authority or otherwise publicly owned utility. We may wind up right exactly where you're talking, John, if we can't get this done, if we can't get this over the finish line. All of the things we looked at, we shot for the moon. Again, that bookending process we started talking about today, and we'll take a step back to a fallback position if we can't get this done. But we think right now, some version of a district energy system is the most economical and carbon reductive way to approach this on a site-wide basis.
Oh yeah, it's economies of scale works so well in favor of this. And you said something that I want to be clear on. Is there going to be a central heat pump system, or are we just going to get a connection to the aquifer for the heat pumps that we have in our buildings?
There will be maybe half a dozen, as it's been explained to me, large wet aquifer wells that we need to co-locate next to some of the big industrial buildings. So those heat pumps are powered by the solar energy coming off that building. And then there will be additional, there you go, bingo. So the big one that goes down to so there'll be some big ones, and then there'll be distribution infrastructure that gets the hot and cool water from building to building. But the idea would be you would be provided, just like at Energy Park, there are pipes coming into those buildings' mechanical rooms, and then what sits in that mechanical room looks different than if you were doing this with fossil fuels.
Okay, so okay, I've seen this on the military bases I've been on. Many of them had this, and of course in Russia, which I've spent a lot of time in, they have this central heating system, pumping hot water around the city. And the Russians did everything the most economical way you could imagine because of limited resources. So excellent. I had no idea. I'm even more excited about this project. My gosh, I thought I was just going to get the 50-degree temperature glycol into my building and then, have my own heat pumps. Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is kind of leading to the next slide, but I'll just go back for a second to mention that the district energy heating especially enables the site to move towards all electric by eliminating the need for those natural gas heating. So the idea is that natural gas service would be restricted to systems or devices for which an equivalent all electric system is either not available, not practical or cost effective, or is determined to present an equity gap. So it seems like heating, water heating should all be able to be taken care of, and maybe if there's just a very specific industrial user on the site that might not be able to replace their natural gas equipment with electric at this time. Other than that, we're looking at all electric. And importantly, that electricity would need to be powered by clean energy sources in order to get to our carbon-free goal. So the goal is to be provided by as much on-site renewables as possible. So this is what this diagram is showing. We already called out the ADAS system where there are central pumps that are doing that thermal exchange with the aquifer. This is showing those at the light industrial buildings, which are in gray here, and then distributing across the site. The residential mixed use buildings are in white. And then the energy balance is showing all of the rooftops maximized for rooftop solar, but because of the heights of the residential buildings and the uses, there is an ability to have excess production in the green bars at the industrial sites with those large, one-story rooftops. And at the residential sites, it's the other way around where we can't quite get enough production to make this a net zero energy building by itself. So the concept here is not a collection of net zero energy buildings, but rather a net zero energy community that leverages the mixed uses in order to make that happen. And from our initial analysis, there's like just about enough room between all of the rooftops and some on-site solar, whether it's some covered parking or other resources to get there by balancing out the excess on light industrial buildings with the residential buildings. So Monty mentioned about 14 megawatts is what that early analysis showed, a combination of rooftop and site-based. And then we wanted to talk a little bit about ownership models in order to both qualify for the LEED credit and also to actually have an impact to accelerate renewable energy development in Minnesota beyond what otherwise would have occurred. It's important for the community, whether it's specific building owners or some other definition of community, to own the renewable energy credits from this on-site solar production so that it's not going towards statewide goals that would otherwise be met with renewable energy elsewhere. So that leads us to this question that has come up from, I think, community members and other stakeholders of what about the idea of actual community solar as a concept. So I wanted to hand that one off to Monty.
Well, there's two questions here. One is about community solar and what are the aspects of it? Is it the wealth creation, community ownership, justice approach to renewable energy deployment that people feel drawn to? Because the finance and the economics of it, it's not like you sign up to it and suddenly your energy bill gets cut in half. And so that's a question. The other question down there in blue is as important because we're also hearing about this and getting a little pushback from some corners. Well, it's really expensive to do all this on site. Why do you really need to do it on site? Let someone else build it more efficiently, more cheaply somewhere else, and you guys can just buy it. And so what is it, and our answer to that is we are right now trying to get renewable energy partners, Michael Kraus and Jemez Staples Group. We're trying to get them under contract right now to help us develop a workforce training program out here for local resident recruitment. Not just for right now, they're doing solar certification training over in North Minneapolis. We want to get in the EV stuff, which they're trying to develop programs for. We have a district energy technology here that folks could get trained in that no one else apparently knows how to do. And so our answer is we think it's important to deploy all this solar on site because of the workforce development component that we believe should be married with this deployment of these solar resources. But what do you folks think? You guys think about this stuff, I think, a lot. And so either one of those two questions, any of your feedback would be really helpful. Chelsea, I think we can hear you now.
Yes. Yeah, we, like for our St. Paul 350 group, we are really interested in locally produced energy because in this, like in the climate crisis, people want to know what we can do and what changes we have control over. And it's hard to know, like right now, I know that some percentage of the electricity I use is coming from coal power, and there's nothing I can do about that. And so the idea that we are in control of our energy and we know where it comes from, we know we have that resilience of locally produced power. It's more efficient when it's produced on site. It's very efficient, and it's not lost over giant power lines. It's just a sense that we are taking control of our energy and that those resources in a way that's more sustainable and more resilient and more democratic when it's community owned. And we know democracy is kind of in trouble right now too.
Thank you for that, Chelsea. Very helpful. Others?
Yeah, community generated electricity. I mean, for a community to have, it's truly the statement of sustainability. If you can produce your own energy, you can control you have a little more control over influxes in the future of your own heating and cooling prices, your well-being, the sustainability of the long haul of ownership or of living in that community. And having that control gives a little more ease, a little more independence for a community like this. And adding the job component that you were talking about, Monty, I have to agree. Is there anything set up where like teasers that are being positioned as far as letting folks know about moving forward with something like that? Like,
when we first started talking to Michael and Jamez, their first proposal was to come out and start training people. This was maybe like 6 months ago. And they were ready to start recruiting people and training people for solar rooftop certification installations at Hillcrest. And I had to pump the brakes on them and say, guys, we're not going to have buildings out here for like 2 or 3 years. So hang back a little bit. I said, but we really could use Michael. I've known as a leader in this industry for many, many years. Jamez, I've got to know more recently, and we really could use their expertise in helping us develop a robust workforce training program around not just solar rooftop, but around the EV stuff, the charging, the car share, the district energy system we talked about. So we really would like to see a local recruitment effort here. Port Authority's been involved in workforce development and customized job training for decades now. And so this is kind of returning to our roots. We haven't done something exactly like this for a little while, but we've asked them to get under contract with us for the next 6 months to figure out the program.
Sure.
And we'll get around to training people when we can see the rooftops getting ready.
Right.
I think John and then Keely might also have comments.
Yes, the solar cells on top of the buildings. I'm not clear on who's going to own those.
So what we will be asking of the marketplace, businesses such as yourself, in order to buy land from us, the real estate marketplace will get a marketing brochure that says requirements or something like that. Maximize rooftop solar, net metered rooftop solar, Port Authority to provide turnkey property assessed clean energy financing. Cash flow positive financing is what PACE is how we refer to it, which should alleviate some concerns of business owners. But generally, these would be net metered rooftop systems owned by that building owner. We know that's a path to success because we've done $300 million of PACE and energy efficiency and solar financing all over the state. And so we know it works. We know the business community, once they figure it out, once they understand it, can embrace it and has embraced it. And the idea of a community solar garden or ground mounted solar, those might be opportunities for other ownership structures, but it's pretty clear we need to maximize every rooftop, and we've got to provide a business case for these building owners as to why they would do that if they're not otherwise inclined to. And we've had 10 years of practice, so I think we can get them there.
Yeah. Okay. And who's the point person on that to talk to? Having solar on my building and getting checks from the power company for half of the year. and living with it and learning a lot about it. Who can I talk to? Because there's some subtleties that I think I could add some value.
On the finance
Related-
side, Pete Klein is the guy
Yeah.
in our office. If it's more about the technology or engineering side, IPS, Impact Power Systems, is under contract with us to help us figure this out as well. So we could connect you with the financial folks or the technical folks, whoever you'd like, John. I think Russ hand up.
Well, Keely was first.
Oh.
I want to do a quick time check. We have
Yeah.
4
Oh my
minutes
God.
left. I think that Monty, Tiffany, and I will reconnect after at 3:30 about ideas for homework. I think that these are great conversations, and we might suggest continuing if you have other ideas about on-site solar or resilience priorities. That is a potential homework. So we'll send something out related to that. We'll make sure to get through the other lead credits and then talk about what's not maybe covered in lead at our next meeting. But I think, Monty, do you have any other closing thoughts, or do you want to kind of try to hit Keely, Russ, and Chelsea in the last 3 minutes?
Let's try and get their comments in the last 3 minutes here, and we'll follow up with you guys. Thank you all for the robust conversation.
Keely.
Yeah, I guess just quickly to answer that question, how important is it to produce 100% of the community's energy needed on site? I agree with a lot of what Chelsea said of it is empowering to folks, and it is empowering to a community to have that knowledge that there's energy generation on site, and to be able to see that really creates, I think, a culture of sustainability within a community, and also lets people know about their own energy usage, that it's coming from somewhere. So much of our systems now are conducted off site. You know, all of my wastewater is taken, my water comes from somewhere. You know, people are really disconnected from all of these systems. So seeing that on site and having that knowledge, I think really helps even like personally people make decisions of how they're using their energy too. And then additionally, it also contributes to that resilience aspect. Having distributed energy systems is going to be more and more important. We had that thunderstorm in December, and there was like lightning all over, and my power got taken out on my street block. So the more we have, you know, storms and different things going on, different stressors to our system, the more important it'll be to have distributed energy systems, and having some of that need met on site, I think, is super important for that.
Keely, thank you so much for that. The Federal Department of Energy we've been talking to, and they are very interested in this concept of distributed energy resources, DER, that are combined under what's called a virtual power plant, a VPP. And they're pretty tantalized that we could try something like that here. I frankly don't know if and how it will work. We're very early in those discussions with DOE, but you are talking about the future here, Keely. Right on. Who do we have left here, Becky? Sorry, I lost track.
It looks like Russ maybe is covered in the comments. Chelsea, did you have a closing thought? Okay. I think we can close out, Monty.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for your time. If you have questions about or want to attend the Planning Commission public hearing next Friday morning, reach out to me directly. Again, my cell number 651-338-1039, 651-338-1039, or you can always shoot me an email. But texting me is always a real good way to get a hold of me. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ready to stop the recording?
Oh, thank you very much.